So I'm honored to help close you out in what I know has been a pretty phenomenal day. Brittany, opening you up and bringing so much energy and insight around that idea of how do we elevate and create really exceptional client experiences. Walter talking mindset. I want to bring us back full circle, really help you think about, particularly around our people, the business. How do we make sure that we close 2021 strong and go have a big 2022? And as I was thinking about just where we might go with our time today, I couldn't help but also think back on the past 20 months. And, if you really think about it, we have all collectively been a part of one of the greatest experiments ever experienced in the world of work. For the vast majority of us, work happened at a specific location during a set period of time. I mean, the research shows, only about 10% of people were actually working fully remote prior to the pandemic. And my guess is that's probably pretty representative for many of you. It's not that maybe you didn't have some flexibility, but you and your team certainly weren't operating fully remote. Some of you possibly, but we moved into this whole new world, and this was in an instant, a dramatic transformation, and our world came to a crashing halt. And while we scrambled to figure out how are we going to do this and do this really well from a work perspective, the pause button got hit on every other aspect of our life, didn't it? We were cut off from and lost connection to people, our favorite places to go, visit, restaurants, entertainment. And I think in that moment of pause, we were given the gift of reflection and this collective moment of reevaluating everything that's important to us. And, I know for me as a small business owner, we've got 10 employees in one of our organizations. And just for some perspective of being in the trenches, in the first 3 weeks of the pandemic, we watched as 75% of projected revenue for the year evaporated like that. 90% of the work that we did at that time was delivering and supporting clients, executive teams in the real world, delivering roughly 100 events like this, individual companies or great groups like this. And that work primarily happened in the real world. And all of that got shut off with very little insight as to when it would actually come back. And, when I reflect on that, if I'm really honest, I think not only was it scary, but I think I also carried a tremendous amount of shame. And I think where the shame came was just my whole value proposition to the marketplace had been based on helping leaders anticipate disruption and navigate transformation. And there I was, having had missed the disruption and was reeling from the transformation and had to fight our way through it. And maybe some of you feel that. I know all of our businesses were impacted in different ways. Maybe some of you thrived. Maybe others, there were moments when it was pretty dark. But the good news is we're a pretty resilient bunch, aren't we? We made our way through the valley of darkness and we have emerged into the light. And I think as we come into this moment right now, we're being extended the opportunity as leaders, as business owners, to contribute to what work is going to look and feel like moving forward. I really believe this is a once in a generation type moment and opportunity. We get to, I see Tiffany, we're still here. Yeah, we are still here, aren't we? And it's worth acknowledging that. But I think it poses a question of what are we going to do with this gift that we've been given? We are still here. And so we get to contribute and put our fingerprints on what work's going to look and feel like moving forward. And since work and life are really all just one thing today, I think it means we get to contribute to what life on this planet is going to look like moving forward. And as leaders, especially small to mid-sized operators, right? We're the lifeblood of the global economy, especially the economy here in the US. You are touching and impacting lives with every decision that you make. And my biggest fear is that I don't want us to just revert back to the way things were before. I want us to meet this moment with clarity and confidence and conviction and really create something that is more human-centered and heart-led, more sustainable. And so what I want to do with our brief time together this afternoon, besides trying the best that I can, it's easy to come from a place of ego of like, I'm going to help you blow this conference out and end on a high note. Please, you've had an unbelievable day. All I want to be able to do is give you a couple little insights from the work that we're doing. Walter alluded to some of our work. I feel very lucky. We've got almost 15 years in this work. We've worked with most of the Fortune 50. We're inside 15 of the biggest organizations in the world right now, along with thousands of smaller and entrepreneurial individuals to really rethink what's work going to look like. How do we structure? How do we attract great talent? How do we keep great talent? How do we move through this moment? So I'm going to share with you 3 external shifts that we're tracking right now, right? From a trend perspective, we're going to kind of put our futurist hats on. 3 big shifts that we want to be mindful of as business owners and leaders as we're now rounding the corner into 2022. And then we're going to talk about 4 principles. We call them future makers, 4 principles of future makers. And these are leaders who really embody this spirit of they're not victims. They're not bystanders of the future. They are co-creators in this process. And I think it's an unbelievable moment and opportunity. It's a defining moment for us. So with that, and I love, we got the chat open. Comment, ask questions. I mentioned co-creators of the future. That's right, Joey. I mentioned I'm going to have Walter come back and join me at the end. We're going to leave a little bit of time for Q&A. So submit in here comments. I'll try to call things out when I see them. Otherwise, we'll have Walter come back at the end and do a little discussion, and then we'll kick you off into your breakout discussion. So with that, let's jump into what we call our 3 big shifts that we are tracking and giving some insight around for leadership. So with that, I'm going to toss over. Oh, hello. We got our PowerPoint backwards. All right. I think I can fix this on the fly, potentially. Let's see if I can do it. Let's see if it saves it. It didn't. We'll try it one more time. Welcome to our world of living. Done. Let's see if it does it. I'm flipping the camera both ways, gang, and for some reason, or maybe you're seeing it right. And
Seth, we're seeing it right.
You are? Oh, for fantastic. Right. I'm glad. So right now you're seeing it right. Perfect. Beautiful. All right, we'll roll with it. So big trend number 1 is what matters now. What do we mean by this? So big external shift. What matters now? This has been a collective existential experience. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean every single human being on this planet in the pause has had a moment for self-reflection and a reevaluation of their highest held values. There's not a single person that I haven't talked to that while the world came to a screeching halt and we had this time, did not go within to ask the biggest questions. Who am I? What do I want? What brings me joy? What am I willing to sacrifice in pursuit of success? How much time away from my family am I willing to spend? And this isn't just a movement of youth reevaluating values. This is every single person. And I think it has huge implications for leaders as we think about our value propositions to the marketplace to attract talent. And thinking about our leadership pipeline, because it's not just our entry-level people. In fact, just as an example, and I have countless stories like this. And again, I know we got great small operators here, but I'll give you a couple of references, small and large. We're in the trenches right now with NASA, helping them design their leader of the future profile and also designing what return to the work is going to look like. And I bring them up because I do think this speaks volumes to this idea of what matters now. And earlier this week on Monday, I was with the financial leaders of Ames Research Center. So NASA is constructed across 10 centers, and we were with Ames on Monday. And the CFO of Ames is a 51-year-old, super high performer, overachieving individual named Amir. And Amir, like many high performers, in his mind, he had one vision as to what life was going to look like. Went to a great school, and in his mind, he said, I'm going to NASA, I'm going to run that place. And he's put his head down, and he has cranked over the last 20 years. And in this moment of pause, They were based in the Bay Area. He and his wife moved back to Arkansas, where her family was. And in Arkansas, he could buy 3 times the house that he could afford in the Bay Area. And he wakes up in the morning and he watches the sun come up over the lake. And for the very first time in his children's life, he's able to see them play in the morning, help them with their homework. Now, he said to me, Seth, and maybe some of you can relate to this. You experienced this firsthand. He's like, I had a glimpse into this whole world that existed without me that I had no idea. Right? It's like they had their own routines, their own language. They did all these things. I had no idea it existed. And then all of a sudden, for the first time, I got to be a part of that world. And I will never, ever, ever be able to give that up or go back on that again. Now, what are the implications of that? NASA is moving from, were 100% in person to now roughly 85% of people have been working almost exclusively remote. Only 15% are actually on site. Now, they're going to try to support remote at scale, but the challenge is, and I want you to think as you scale and grow your business, is Amir, what are the implications for him when it comes to his career trajectory? The likelihood that he will be tapped to run full centers, to take over the entire agency, if he's unwilling to move around. And for the first time in his life, what matters most to him is not the title behind his name at one of the biggest agencies in the world, one of the most, heralded names. It's being there to watch his kids grow up. And that's a decision that he would have never made before. So what does that mean? What are the implications for us as leaders of even small and mid-sized operators? I don't know about you, but I'm trying to fill 3 roles right now. And I can sense the pushback and the questions that we are getting for some of those roles, for people wanting clarity as to what's my life going to be like if I go on this journey with you? Our responsibility as owner operators and leaders to be able to communicate a compelling employee value proposition and solicit them, invite them into the process, into our vision when people are reevaluating. And I just gave you one anecdotal example, but I bet if we went around the table and we asked each other, like, what's one thing you discovered about yourself? What's one value that you either reestablished or shifted or changed over the past 20 months? The stories that we would hear. And it shows up in the numbers too, gang. Listen, we go back to our slides. I'm curious. I'm going to throw this number up there, and I want you to drop it into the chat. Does anybody know what that number represents? 4.3 million. Anybody know what that number is? If you know, drop it into the chat function. 4.3 million. Anybody know what that is? Lightning strikes. That's pretty good, actually, with the image. Yeah, that was meant to be stormy skies. Number of people. There you go. Jessica nailed it. Specifically, that is the number of people who quit their jobs in August. Now, when I saw that number, it seems like it's a lot, but then you're also thinking, okay, but what is it in comparison to, is that a lot? Is that a little? Is that more than normal? Well, that number is up 242,000, not from the year before, but from the month before. That's up 250,000 from the month before in July. Now, I've had some leaders who have said to me, Seth, part of that, allowing people to reevaluate and sit on the sidelines has been due to, government support, and, people can afford to do it. But that's ended. And we are only seeing these numbers continue now as we're in almost the close of October. And so, again, the mindset is, as leaders, recognizing, I look at that 4.3 number and I can either get frustrated by it, I can lament it, or I can see it as an opportunity. And that's how we choose to see it on our team. It's like 4.3, not necessarily all of them are highly skilled, highly educated, perfect profiles, but there are a number of individuals just like Amir who are punched out and are curious and looking for what the next opportunity is. And to me, if we're clear about who we are and where we're going, there's an opportunity to capture an amazing group of individuals. So that's big shift number 1 that we're tracking in the marketplace, is what matters now. Shift number 2 is how work and life have changed. And I want to give you 6 micro shifts that we're tracking that I think are incredibly important for every single leader as you're thinking about change and transformation happening inside your firm. So 6 little micro transitions that we're following break down like this. The first one I'll point out in the upper left-hand corner, there is increased boundary transition. Increased boundary transition. So what do we mean by that? Increased boundary transition. Well, prior to the pandemic, for most of us, you had a hour commute in the morning, and in that commute, there was an opportunity to put your game face on, right? You get ready to go to battle, and you step in, you put your work persona on. And then at the end of the day, maybe for some of us, it was putting our game face and our battle gear on to be able to walk back home into potentially the chaos of the house, depending upon how many little kids are running around, our spouse, etc. In the pandemic, what did that look like? It looked like we woke up and it was all happening in the same place. You're having breakfast, you're in a conversation with your significant other, then you're in a performance review with an employee, then you're teaching a third grade lesson to your children. Worlds collide. That's exactly right, John. What I'm curious is, how many of you used your boss voice with your significant other or spouse, and they gave you that look like, who do you think you're talking to there, pal? I 100% found myself in that place. I'm coming out of a performance review conversation. Emily says so much. Yes. And then you're trying to help children. Incredibly difficult. Increased boundary transition. Network constriction. What do we mean by network constriction? This is really important, especially business owners. We think about business development. So network theory, the idea was during COVID, our strong connections got stronger and our weak connections got weaker. Right. So what do we mean by that? Our strong connections. This is all of the people that maybe you did a bubble. How many of you maybe did a bubble during the early days of COVID, or it's like your close team, your neighbors, your friends you were with. Those connections got tighter. They got closer. But all of our loose connections. I think a good example of it would be like all of you in this community. We got 183 people on. Not being able, you would normally come physically together and you see friends. I'm here in Minnesota right now. I've had a couple of in-person events, and I'm seeing it play out in real time. People who haven't seen each other in 24 months, right? They're the loose connections. And what's risky about our loose connections getting looser is so often that's where we get great ideas. Innovation strikes from that. You get references, you get referrals. You're looking for a new hire. You're looking for an introduction, right? The magic that happens when we're physically together. And hopefully, and I do think it is how this event has been structured. And I'm so impressed with Casey and the team of like putting you in these environments and using these tools to try to replicate some of that. Has been pretty powerful. The veil of ignorance. What do we mean by this? Veil of ignorance being lifted. Essentially what this is we finally got to see into people's personal lives. How many of your employees, you never saw the inside of their home prior to the pandemic? Now for the very first time, you see their kitchen, you're seeing their family, you're seeing the dog, you're seeing the chaos, you're seeing the little kids, you're seeing maybe the mess. And you're also maybe seeing that not everybody's pandemic was created equal. And I felt very blessed. It's like, we had a pretty good home setup to be able to weather our way through this. That wasn't the same for everyone. Even the assumption of just that everybody, again, depending upon the work that you do in your employees, maybe not even all of our employees had internet access for their kids to be able to go to school or for them to be able to do what they needed to. Like there's an assumption there, and we got clarity into this idea of this was not the same for everyone. Veil was lifted. Increased pace of work. The research was just unequivocal around this. I've had some business owners lament to me of, worrying about letting their people continue to work remotely. They have this vision of, people are watching SportsCenter and playing with their dog all day. And it's just like the data doesn't back it up. We're working close to 3 hours longer per day. It's actually harder to unplug, which leads out to some of the mental health issues that we're navigating right now. Shifting expectations of leaders. The big thing here is just there has been, and I know you know this, the data unequivocally points to people want vulnerability, transparency, and just like authenticity, just to be real with them, to be able to pierce through the camera and not be this caricature. And so people for the first time saw leaders that maybe they were in this vaulted position with the big title and the big office. For the first time, they saw them as human beings. And that expectation is going to carry forward moving forward. Your ability to be able to reveal yourself, to be able to tap into your own truth, your own pain, to speak from the heart, whether it's through the camera lens or in person, that's the new expectation. And the last one I'll point to is just this idea of energy depletion. The overarching numbers around mental health and well-being are really, really, really alarming. And I don't think we can not talk about that as we look towards the future when it comes to this idea of leadership. Part of our responsibility is shepherding souls through this moment in time. Whether or not you consciously signed up for that or not, that's what this moment calls for. You look at these numbers, man. At the end, we're lonely, feeling overworked, burned out, stressed out, filled with anxiety, and over half of people having checked out. Those numbers are no joke. I look at those numbers and I think about for myself, and I don't know how it was for you, but there's been different moments throughout the pandemic that were challenging. Maybe right now the pandemic is just, we're through it. You see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's great. Maybe it was tough for you in the beginning, or maybe it is tough for you now. For me, in the early days, those first 3 weeks, it was just survival. And I think like many business owners, small business owners, you just shove all the emotion of the moment down in order to slay the dragon at hand. There isn't time to feel anything. And for me, it wasn't until about this time last year, October of 2020, before I could actually let myself feel the weight of what had happened, the weight of the loss, the weight of I missed people so much, every week I was with our clients, with meeting new people. And you can only talk into a camera lens for so long before you feel the effects and the disconnection. And when I finally let myself feel what was there, what I found was that I couldn't actually articulate what the emotion was. I couldn't label it. It was this mix of anger and frustration and fear and sadness and angst rolled into one, and I couldn't label it. I found with my work and coaching leaders is that many leaders couldn't articulate their emotions either. And it goes so far beyond just the fact that in general, as men, we're terrible at this. We're not taught how to communicate, how to even identify and feel what's going on in our bodies, let alone be able to put language to it. But the reason I bring it up is because some of you might be thinking like, well, who cares if we can't label these emotions, man? Like, we're in the business to make money and a profit and grow for the next year. Like, why are we talking about this? Because I think this is one of the most critical mental health and overall well-being moments in time. And as a leader, again, whether you are consciously aware of it or not, you have signed up to support people through this. When we can't label an emotion, what we know from neuroscience is that our brains will actually hijack the process, and it will convince us that those feelings are unworthy of yours and others' time and attention. And I'd be willing to bet you've maybe experienced that at different times. You have a little nagging feeling, something is bothering you and you can't put your finger on it. And so you just sort of like the little voice in the back of your head tells you just to get over it. Stop being a baby. Don't worry. Press on. Don't look at it. Or we don't slow down. We throw ourselves in work and we distract ourselves so that we don't have to actually feel that feeling and identify what's there. But what we also know from medical research, Cleveland Clinic has done so much work around this. It's incredible. All those unacknowledged emotions don't just magically leave the body, and they manifest. They show up in the form of just pain, discomfort, aches and pains. Things, we think we ran around too much in the backyard and that's why our knee and neck hurts. Meanwhile, we've been unwilling to actually pay attention to what we're going through this moment in time. And so I'll just simply say this. You're so right, Sarah. We must be human first. I've got 191 people on here right now. I just want you to know that wherever you're at, whether you're flying high right now or you're feeling the effects, and listen, in the field of psychology, we think about human emotion on the scale from depression to flourishing. And my guess is, based on my own experience in time with so many leaders like many of you, is that you're probably somewhere in between. And the challenge with being somewhere in between is we can find ourselves in this no man's land area. In fact, some of you maybe saw Adam Grant wrote a beautiful piece in the New York Times in the early summer addressing this no man's land in between flourishing and depression. This place called languish. And if you're taking notes, I want you to write this down. Languish. Languish is this state that we don't talk about very often because it's really subtle. It's, if we were to sort of languishing, you nailed it, Alan, languishing. It's this state of just feeling like stuck, stagnant. You lost your spark, sort of uninspired. You just don't have it right now. The light sort of went out of your eyes a little bit. And it's so subtle, it's hard to spot because it's like you're not really suffering from true mental illness, but you're also not the epitome of mental health either. You're not flourishing. And so many of us want to get back to that place. We feel robbed from it. And And so Grant gives a couple of great analogies. Like, how do you know if you're in that space? And he's like, a couple of examples are like, this, thanks for putting that in there, Melissa. Beautiful. It's like the Sunday night, moment when we're thinking about the week. And instead of getting to bed at a good time so that we can hit our morning routines, start the week strong, right? Whatever that time is for you. I like to be moving towards bed, 9:30, 10 o'clock. Instead of going to bed, we watch another episode of a stupid Netflix rerun. Or like for me, I swear, National Treasure with Nicolas Cage is like always on my cable, and you'll watch it again for the 1,000th time instead of going to bed. Or in the morning, you set your alarm for 6 a.m. and instead of popping up, hit your morning routines, meditate, right? Breath work, cold shower, whatever it is that you're doing to set the day up. What do? Hit snooze. We doom scroll for an hour, play words with friends, and drag ourselves out of bed. Languish. The reason languish is so dangerous and delicate is because research shows that people are 5 times more likely to slip into depression over the next 12 to 18 months when you're in the state of languish. And I just, I debated whether or not I even wanted to talk about it today. And then when I had an in-person event 2 days ago with financial advisors, and I had this super high performing advisor in front of me, it's a small room, maybe I had 15, 20 people. They all have got teams of 5 to 10. She seemed like she was perfectly switched on. She's doing great numbers, team's in a great place. And she came up to me afterwards with almost tears in her eyes. And she was like, that is exactly where I am. And I just haven't had the words to describe it. She's like, I've let my routines go. And my husband keeps asking me like, what's wrong? And I'm like, I don't really know. Like, it's not full blown depression. So she's like, I didn't felt like I needed to go to a therapist. But the dangerous is it's dangerous because it's so slippery. And the reason I bring that up is because we make assumptions about each other all the time. We make assumptions about how our people are feeling, the state that they're in. And so I'm just going to give you 3 little quick hitters to support yourself, to find some self-compassion, and to support your people in this moment in time, because you're being called to do it. So number 1, if you're taking notes, just name the emotion. It's one of the most powerful strategies we have. In the field of psychology, we know the fastest way to move through an emotional state is first and foremost just to name it. And that's what we did for Elizabeth earlier this week. She came up, she was empowered by just having the words. I saw it in her eyes. She was like, I could finally point to something of like, yes, that's what I am. I'm in languish. And now that I know, now I can start to move through it. So number 1 is name the emotion. Number 2 is normalizing the struggle. We got to normalize the struggle. And what we're doing right now is normalizing the struggle. It doesn't have to be listen, if you want to do a full-blown mental health day and talk about it, you absolutely should. But we can find ways to incorporate it into everything that we do. In normalizing the struggle as a leader, our responsibility and opportunity is to be able to point to the pain, the struggle that you've gone through, to be able to share what's been hard for you for the past 20 months. Now, a lot of times I'll get some leaders who will push back and be like, listen, Seth, I can't start talking about all the trauma I've experienced and like crying in front of my people. I got to project confidence in the future. Like, I need people to trust me. I totally get it, which is why there's 2 parts to the equation in normalizing the struggle. We reveal the pain, but we follow it up with here's the path and the plan forward, right? So I can point to the pain and I can say things like, I can say to you, there was a moment in the summer of 2020 when I wasn't 100% sure if our business was going to survive. 10 years of year-over-year growth. And I felt so robbed that it might slip away from us. December of 2020, I lost my father-in-law to COVID. We were one of the families who said goodbye outside of the hospital window in Florida. Now, I know that my loss is not your loss, but I know that you experienced your version of all of that too. And so I can point to that, but because I can then follow it up and say, the way I got through that, the way I'm sitting here with you now in October of 2021 is the routines and rituals, meditation, my spiritual practice that were embedded that helped pull me through. My coach, my therapist, my community. How many of you had a community around you? And your community is what helped pull you through, right? So there was the pain and here was the path. And that's what leadership is. I feel everything that you're going through. And here is how I pulled myself through. This community right here might have been part of what pulled you through. That's leadership. And the last one I'll give you is what we call reframing the story. And this was maybe one of the most powerful things to get me through the last 20 months. So we've got naming the emotion, normalize the struggle, and this idea of reframing the story. So I had a question posed to me in the early part of the pandemic that fortunately really salvaged it. I'm originally from Minnesota. I grew up on a farm. My wife and I had been in Los Angeles for the past 10 years, and we were there in the early days of remember when we went into lockdown? Do you remember with the stay-at-home orders? Like, can you even remember that far back of like what we didn't even know what that meant? Like, what do you mean stay in our houses? And in my mind, I probably have watched too many apocalyptic movies where I was just convinced there was going to be National Guard in the streets in LA. And I'm like, we got to get out of here. And so my wife and I drove to the Washington, Oregon coast border along the Columbia River to quarantine with a dear friend and mentor. He's in his early 60s. He had a big exit a couple of years ago. And it was the perfect place for me to be able to run crisis management of the firm. It's like we're bleeding out, and I had him to kind of give me guidance. And I'll never forget, we're 3 weeks into the lockdown, and it's like 10:30 on a Wednesday night, and we're in the kitchen, and I am just lamenting after another day of like 5 canceled contracts. And I remember saying to him, COVID was the worst thing that ever happened to my business. I felt so robbed. It was like we were set to have a record-setting year in 2020, and I don't know if we're going to survive. Now, this was the worst thing that could ever happen to my business. I'll never forget. He comes around the island, and he gets right up in my face, and he's like, "Buddy, what if COVID wasn't the worst thing that ever happened to your business? What if COVID was the greatest thing that ever happened to your business?" Now, I'm not going to lie to you. In the moment, I'm like, bro, get away from me with this positive psychology crap. Like, I know what you're doing, and I don't want any part of it. Because I do know it. It's like you don't want to hear it in the moment. But I go to bed that night, and I just let the question percolate. And I don't jump out of bed. I'm not like a convert, but like there was a crack that was opened. And I allowed the question to start to work on me of what if it was the greatest thing that ever happened to my business? What would that mean for me? What would it mean for my marriage, from the family we're trying to build if I wasn't on the road 150 nights a year? What if I could figure out how to make virtual great? Because I was telling myself also a story that I could never be as impactful talking to a camera lens as I was if we were physically together. Now, how do you think that impacts how I show up if I'm telling myself the story? I'm lost out of the start, right? I made the shift slowly but surely. This can be the greatest thing. And so I'll come back to you with this. What's the story you're telling yourself right now as you close out 2021? We tell ourselves stories all the time. It's what we do as humans to help make sense of the world around us. You're telling yourself a story about something. So maybe it's something going on with your family, your spouse, significant other, your kids. Maybe it's a story you're telling yourself about one of your business partners, something that's happening with the team. My challenge to you is what would happen if you reframed that story from something that robbed you of energy and empowered you to create what you want to create in 2022? What's the story? And as a leader, I would also sprinkle in the back of your mind, what's the story your team's telling themselves? Because every team tells stories, right? There's a story that gets created, especially as you're navigating change. And with COVID, you probably have some internal transformation that's going on, plus all of this external. And storylines get created about what that means for them, where you're going. If we're not intentional about shaping those stories, teams will run away with them on their own. Find the self-compassion by naming the emotion, normalizing the struggle, and reframe the story for yourself and for your teams. All right, we're going to go into shift number 3. Who holds power? Now, for basically since the Industrial Revolution, there has been tension between labor and leadership. There has been this brewing tension and battle for decades. But we're watching a new and amplified iteration of this. I mean, and we're seeing it play out at scale. You know, you just look at the number of strikes right now. We've got Kellogg's, we've got John Deere, there's a big strike happening in Hollywood. 10,000 laborers on John Deere. I don't know. Some of you saw the news this week, but one of the ways to break the strike, John Deere tried to train management to go onto the shop floor and be able to actually do some of the labor. And by 8 a.m. the first day, ambulances were already showing up to the facility. That's a true story. You can check that in the news. 8 a.m. ambulance was already there. Now, fortunately, it wasn't a fatality, but the accountant drove the forklifts into some machine. Labor is being emboldened, right? Through social, Starbucks, 100% is another example. I believe that's in Buffalo. Baristas trying to unionize there. There's this mindset, and I don't think they're wrong, especially through COVID, of like, you as essential workers, you're willing to sacrifice us on the front lines, and you haven't shared in the overall gain that's come from that. And with the power of social and digital tools, particularly as that has expanded amongst youth, it's not just in industrial blue collar labor type professions. It's now bleeding over into white collar work. And I think it's leading to this idea we call employee power, where you really are seeing employees demand and push back on leadership when it comes to social issues, when it comes to decisions about how work and life are going to feel moving forward. And I like to pay attention to how media portrays the messages that marketing sends out, especially to youth, because as a leader, it gives me clues as to how are they going to show up, and how might that influence my value propositions? And I actually want to play you a video. And this is a campaign that just recently came out from GoDaddy featuring the tennis player Naomi Osaka. And what I want you to pay attention to is just listen to the messaging. For those of you who have children, especially if you've got kids between, say, 10 and 25, I want you to think about how this message lands in the ear of a 15-year-old. What's at the core, the ethos of the message that they're communicating? So with that, we're going to toss to this video, and then I'll ask you to maybe submit a thought or two in the chat box. So here we go.
We've all had some time to think, to imagine a world where we have the tools to sell things that aren't just things. They mean something, like a sunscreen made for melanated skin that actually blends in. Whatever you're selling, prove that things don't have to be the way they've always been. The world's been waiting for what you do.
Okay, so while that was playing, I was reading a couple of your comments in there, and I saw Alessandra had a great comment there. If we only spent as much time thinking about our employees' needs as we spent thinking about our customers and clients, and you're so right. A part of our responsibility as leaders, if we take care of our people will take care of our customers. So I'm looking for, right out of the gate, JT, empowerment, right? Some of the messages, a statement maybe that you heard that stood out to you, a huge message of empowerment though, right? Absolutely. Anything else before I give my perspective that anybody noticed, picked up, a statement that she said that you found interesting or surprised you? Then I'll give you just a minute to drop something in there if something hit you. I love seeing this. I'll tell you a couple that came through loud and clear to me, especially that last couple of statements of things don't have to be the way they've always been. And then the last thing that she says at the close of it is, the world's been waiting for what you do. And I just, I can't help but think back on messages that I think many of us received as children. You think it's like when you were a kid, is that the message you heard? The world is waiting for you to show up. The world's waiting for what you do. No, the truth is most of us heard things like children are meant to be seen and not heard. And you speak when you are spoken to, right? It wasn't the same level of like, you are empowered with these tools to be able to launch and bring ideas to the marketplace. You can spark movements. You can spark revolutions. Your voice can influence the masses. And so my message around that is I just sort of look at like who holds power now. as a business owner is thinking about how I harness that. It's easy to go down a path of like thinking it's a message of entitlement and who do these kids think they are because they show up and they expect to be the CEO and have these titles and positions. Is I want to channel it. I want to manage those expectations, but I want to channel that ambition and invite them into the journey of transformation and what we are trying to create. I want to create alignment between their vision and mine so that I can harness that. So 3 big trends we want to be paying attention to. We're looking at what matters now. There's a total reevaluation of our values, how work and life are shifting and changing, and the implications for how we structure work. And finally, who holds power. In response to this, I'm going to give you a couple of principles. Channel that ambition 100% that I want you to use to be able to catapult you into 2022. So with that, we're going to jump into this final piece. So principle number 1 is what we call predicting like a futurist. Predicting like a futurist. Now, what do we mean by this? Predicting like a futurist. Listen, part of the reason why most of us got surprised by COVID was because we didn't really think it could happen. Like, despite the fact that we know that pandemics, like that it can happen, we've seen the movies, but like most of us did not do disaster planning and contingent planning for a global shutdown. You are locked in your home and you cannot physically see your employees. And the reality is we take a similar approach to our industries and our professions. We often think that tomorrow is going to look pretty much like today. And that's true until it no longer is. And as a result, we then have to scramble to play catch up. You know, you think about how much we all had to scramble to respond, for the most part, to our virtual environment. You know, getting our teams in order, getting machines for everybody, figuring out how to do virtual well. It's challenging. And so one of the tools that I want to give you to not be surprised moving forward, because that's really what futurists do. Futurists are not trying to perfectly predict the future. People often think that's what they're doing, but what they're really doing is helping us not be surprised by the future, which is what we want. And so a tool that we like to use as futurists is a tool we call the cone of possibilities. And I think this is a phenomenal planning tool. It's the perfect time of year to be doing this. And some of you maybe use this tool, but I think it's a great tool for us to be using in conversation like this. So the cone of possibilities. So we've got the cone of possibility in front of us. So the narrow end of the cone, which we would look through, represents our current moment in time. It represents the now. And obviously that's a smaller cylinder circumference. So it represents a small number of possible scenarios, meaning tomorrow will look probably pretty much like today. But as we go farther out, the number of possible future scenarios that are going to impact our industry, our profession, technology, et cetera, they continue to expand. And so we use 3 questions to sort of evaluate those possible future scenarios. And they break down like this. The first question we think about is, what do we want to have happen? So I look out, and you could do this in planning. You could be like, all right, let's look out a year, or let's look 2 to 3 years out. What do I want to have happen for the business, in our industry, for your profession, right? You can apply it to a number of different things. Now, the challenge is most people stop at that point, right? We only look out and we only think about what we want to have happen. But a good futurist knows we've got to go beyond that. And so we apply another question. And that next question is, what might happen? So I know what I want to have happen, but what might happen? And then we actually add a third question on top of that, which is what's possible, but not likely. And I'll give you a specific example of how I use this. Using this tool actually helped us, I think, evolve the business faster in response to COVID as we worked through the summer and into the fall. Because I did this with the team. We huddled up and it was like, what do we want to have happen? And at the time I was like, I just want to get back in person. Like, I want to be done. At the time, I literally was only using my laptop camera and I was so tired of being cut off. What I want to get back in person. But we pushed farther into the second question. Well, what might happen? Well, what might happen is that this thing might drag on and there may be 5 different new variations that we have to deal with. And at the time of planning, we're like, we could still have to be doing virtual in the spring of 2021. And here we are in October. But because of that thought, I made a mental shift because honestly, the approach I had at that point was I was just trying to get through. I was just trying to be good enough to get through it. How many of you ever experienced that before? Just trying to get through this. I just got to get back to the way it was before. Man, I know so many teams, especially sales teams, right? You've been cut off from your customers. It's like, we just have to be good enough with these tools so we can get back to in person. You got to catch yourself in that. What if we don't go back to the way things were? What if this is it? And so that for me was a big shift of like, I don't want to just be okay at this and just get through. I want to be exceptional at this. And so we doubled down and we invested in studio and equipment, all of this stuff that I'm doing today, tossing to slides and bringing me up, throwing to video. I didn't know how to do any of these things 20 months ago, none of it. And so it requires a level of curiosity, but also the courage to be really terrible at it in the beginning and be okay with not being good, which is hard for many of us who are high performers in one area of our life to then go over here and not be good and risk looking foolish. I had to change the story and I had to lean in with curiosity to try new things on that front. What does that look like for you? And then when we said what's possible but not likely, we took it one step further. And what's possible but not likely is, as more and more artificial intelligence start to roll out, how do we compete with that? Right? How many of you saw Sophia, the artificial intelligent robot, talking and doing interviews with Tony Robbins? She was doing that. This is literally a walking. I don't know actually she's walking. I think they set her down. She can have full-blown conversations. The reason I bring her up is because she has been speaking at conferences, which means there was a human being who didn't get booked for that slot that Sophia is in. Now, if artificial intelligent machine learning machines can know everything about everything and we're in the business of knowledge and research, how do I compete with that? And so as a team, we did an exercise looking out and we said, what do we have as a differentiator to the Sophias of the world? And our differentiator is our humanity. And so for the very first time, and I never used to talk about like the things I've shared with you today, the talking about the challenges that I've experienced in our own business. I never used to talk about those things, but I just discovered of like, I have to be able to tap into what it has been like for me to go through this. Because guess what? Sophia may be able to predict exactly where we're going in the next 20 years, but what Sophia can't do is she can't tell you what it's like to say goodbye to a loved one through a hospital window. She doesn't know. I know. And so even if you didn't do that exactly, I feel everything that you went through. And so that becomes our competitive advantage. And so as you look at what's possible but not likely that's going to disrupt your space or your profession and your role, you say, my humanity, where does my humanity give me a competitive advantage? Where does our humanity help us create an exceptional client experience? How does that influence my mindset as we roll into 2022? All right. This is what we get from predicting like a futurist. Go back, come back. Our next one is what we call thinking like a scientist. And Walter, just so you know, I'm going to take us home with this one. I'm going to bring you back at about 3-4 minutes here, and we're going to get a question or two in, and you can take us home. So thinking like a scientist. So when I get pressed by people of like, what's one piece of advice that you can give people as they move into this moment in time? To me, it comes down to this: thinking like a scientist. What do we mean by this? The best scientists, the best scientists who can operate from a state of real, true humility, how do they approach their work? They develop a hypothesis about something unknown, and they run experiments and try to disprove that hypothesis. They work to prove themselves wrong. And they stay open. They say, I have a hunch about this thing, but I don't know. And they fight to disprove it. A good scientist values humility over ego and curiosity over conviction. And as we move into this dynamic new world of work, it requires a level of operating like a scientist to experiment through this. And I see this especially playing out as it relates to how do we structure a hybrid or remote work type environment for ourselves and for our teams. And I see these battle lines getting drawn. People are like, we're a remote first company, or our office, we're an in-person firm. Well, what happens is then they look for data to validate their position. When in reality, we want to stay open. Nobody knows. Anybody who tells you they know exactly what work should look like and what the future of work is going to be is trying to sell you something. There is no one future of work. There are only futures of work for you to design and create what's right for you. It's not about a formula. It's about frameworks. So I'm going to leave you with this framework to think through designing how you're going to structure work in 2022. So we break it down like this. I want to think about every individual on my team in our company through the lens of jobs and tasks, employee preferences, projects and workflows, and the idea of inclusion and fairness. So many people we talk to right now that's like, how many days a week are you going into the office? Well, you know what? We're going to do 2 days a week. We want flexibility. Well, why did you pick 2? Well, because I had to pick a number between 1 and 5, and 2 or 3 felt pretty good. It's like, but is 2 the right number? Is 3 the right number for everybody? Great. Well, if it wasn't, how would we design it? Well, we don't know because we didn't have a framework to design something different. So for jobs and tasks, I look at every single job and I run it through the lens of productivity. These are the 4 lenses of productivity, which is energy, focus, coordination, and cooperation. And so I look at that role and I think to myself, what does it take to be energized? Does it need to be doing focused work? Is it about coordinating multiple people? Is it cooperation? So it's work, it's innovation work, right? Why am I having people come in doing focused work inside an office? I can't tell you how many clients we've been in. I see people with their Bose noise cancellation headphones on, head down, annoyed and frustrated they had to drive an hour in traffic to sit there and do focus work. Why? Because it was one of the 2 days a week we said we were going to be in the office. No. It's not that it's right or wrong. I just want to give you the framework to be able to design something different. And we'll make this available, but I'll go back to this image. I want you to really sink into that of just jobs and tasks, employee preferences. We ask our people, where do they do their best work? Projects and workflows, we're designing work for a new world. We're not replicating work that worked in our offices before. Right? I can't, otherwise we overwhelm each other with, synchronous communication that just overwhelms people. And inclusion and fairness is just remembering that not everybody's experience of the pandemic has been the same. And if you've got, like the John Deere's, the manufacturers of the world, you've got some of your staff, they can't be remote. How do I make that feel fair? What can I do for them to help elevate their employee experience? And the last closing thought I'll leave you with is this, and this is in closing. So I told you I had a question that really changed the pandemic for me, which was around reframing the story. But I also had someone pose something to me that really helped me make a mental shift. They asked me about 6 months ago, they said, Seth, what do you think your magic is? And at the time, I'd really been focused on all these new digital fun tools, these things we've been using today. And I start going off in my new studio I built, and I can do all these things, and I can toss to these things. And this individual was like, yeah, that's cool, Seth, but that's not your magic. I was like, he could see that I was struggling. He's like, buddy, your magic is you. Your magic has always been you. It's how you show up. It's how you make people feel. It's the presence that you bring to the moment. And the reason I share that with you is because I think somewhere along the lines, I'd given my power away to all these external tools. And I needed a reminder that actually, even right now, when we're separated through camera lenses and fiber, the magic is how I choose to show up and what do I drop into. And so as you're planning 2022, the tools, the strategy, the perfectly crafted customer experience, it all matters. But at the end of the day, I want you to remember, my magic is me, your magic is you, and our magic is us together. Whether we do it digitally or whether we come together, it's this. And so from the bottom of my heart, I so appreciate, and I love the fact I still got 185 people tuned in right now for the time together, for the opportunity to help close out this phenomenal conference, coming full circle, find self-compassion. And we got to be able to tap in and support people through this, name the emotion, normalize the struggle, right? Reframe the story. We want to predict like futurists. We're going to use that tool, cone of possibility, so that we don't get surprised by the future. Force yourself to ask those following questions. We're going to think like scientists. What's one experiment that you can run in the next 90 days and embed that in your culture so people have a spirit of experimentation? We don't fear failure. We have a tolerance for it. And you remember your magic is you, man. I love it. So with that, Walter, I'm going to have you come back. I know I took us right to the top of the hour. Maybe we can ask Casey for an extra minute or two. We can go over by 60 seconds and get a question or two, and then you can take us home.
Well, you know what, Seth, this is your world, baby. You did such a great job. You know, everyone wanted to hear from you. My job was to throw an alley oop, and you slammed it home. You're real. You're authentic. You're down to earth. You're smart. You're vulnerable. I mean, you shared a lot with us. So we got time for one really, really good question.
Cool.
And I want to show that on stage. The question comes from Sarah. How do you continue to cultivate a good work culture as you scale a business? What needs to be in place?
Such a good question, Sarah. So, you know, when you say scale the business, I think not only as you grow, but also as you move into a hybrid or virtual environment. So culture, what is, first of all, you have to get clear on what is culture. And to me, it's values and behaviors. And so it's being really clear. What are the values? What are the behaviors that we want to encourage? What you celebrate, what you acknowledge, what you call out, you will see more of. And so in a virtual environment, I'm looking for ways to be able to support and celebrate. We got to make time for some of that. You know, we jump into all these Zoom meetings and we get right into the business. It's like, if celebration, acknowledgement, appreciation is a value that's important to your culture, spend the first 5 minutes doing those things. Have people celebrate one another, acknowledge. If learning and development is a value that's important to you, dedicate the first 5 to 10 minutes to like having people teach and share what they're learning so that it supports it. And you can do it in these virtual environments. You can use these tools to help do it. And you make sure that every team, right, is speaking that same language. And it's so critical in these virtual environments. What we celebrate, what we acknowledge, we'll see more of.
Well, you know, Seth, thank you for your time, man. I wish we had time for more questions, but some of your statements earlier were just like, man, we're still here,
I
right? That
appreciate
is what
it.
I want to know. I don't know how every individual got through this little COVID. It seems like it's starting to tail a little bit, but you said it best. We're still here. And one of my favorite songs is by a rapper named Drake. We started at the bottom, now we're here, right? So everybody's got their own story, their own testimony, and just keep doing what you do. Thank you for joining us today. I don't know if you can hang out a little bit more and pop into some networking group. I'm sure some people would love to continue to communicate with you. I will touch base with you and Ryan Estes. So we got to go and eat some tater tot hot dish or something.
We will, Walter. I appreciate all you're doing. I appreciate everything you're doing, my friend. Have a great day.